Missouri has been far from perfect so far, but when you look around the rest of the country, you realize, hey, the Tigers are still right in the thick of this college football playoff race. I'll explain why coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, I've offered some criticisms recently. Well, I'd like to offer some solutions to Missouri's red zone and short yardage woes. And also, I think it is time to get the others involved, as Shaquille O'Neal might say on Inside the NBA. But before I start the program, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first live event ticket purchase. And by the way, just a quick quote here from Bruce Feldman, a national college football writer at The Athletic. He says, quote, "Right now, people inside the business think that Florida may not be as attractive of a job as Missouri or Ole Miss." Hey, Bruce, I really appreciate you listening to Locked On Mizzou, obviously, but next time you can just quote me directly. We don't need to be so evasive. But you know what? In all seriousness, though, there is some major national news in terms of the rankings for Missouri that I didn't get to on yesterday's program. The Tigers have dropped all the way down to 11th in the AP poll. And that's a little bit concerning on the surface if you're the type of person that puts a lot of stock in national rankings. But the deal is, again, I hate to bottom line it for you once again, Missouri, yes, survived by the skin of its teeth on Saturday, but a win is a win is a win nonetheless. And if the Tigers get to 11-1, clearly they're in the playoff. 10-2, they're right in the hunt, that type of deal. And while the Tigers have not been perfect at all, to say the least, to start the season, well, there's been a lot to like about the start of the season for Missouri as well. So perhaps perfection should not be the standard here, because if you actually take a step back and not just examine the Tigers, especially through the lens of our own preconceived expectations of this season, well, let's look around at the rest of the country really quickly. And speaking of that AP poll, well, here's your top six. And to me, this top six, this is the absolute top tier right now. This is the cream of the crop of college football. And even though Georgia, for example, who's number 2 in the AP poll, even Georgia has had its moments, of course, against Kentucky, especially where you're going, gee, can the Bulldogs actually pass protect here? And, you know, Carson Beck looks a little different under pressure than when he has that perfect pocket, doesn't he? And even Texas, hey, they've got their backup quarterback now. Now, most of us would love to have the Arch Manning as your backup quarterback problems. That's for darn sure. I got to say, Tennessee and Ole Miss are off to about as good of a start as they could expect so far, even to the point where I think I would move Tennessee and Ole Miss ahead of Alabama right now. The Crimson Tide had a little bit of trouble with South Florida this season, but I really think the Tide deserve to be in this group, and appropriately you get a little bit of an advertisement here, and that gets you to what to me is the second tier of college football: Miami, Oregon, Penn State, Utah, and finally our Missouri Tigers here to round out the top 11 of the AP top 20, of the AP top 11, I should say here. And to me, if you look at these teams so far, just on paper, of course, Oregon had its struggles earlier in the season. Penn State looking better with Drew Aller. Heck, they struggled with Connor Bazelak at one point earlier this season. So I just think you can pick nits with anybody in this group, though they're all undefeated Power 4 group of, high group teams, power teams, high major teams, whatever the proper term we're supposed to use is these days. To me, Missouri is right there Would we like to see Missouri in that top tier? Maybe at the top end of this second tier? Sure. I really think 11th is pretty fair for Missouri at this point. And again, if I scroll down even further down the list here, look at Notre Dame, for example, who is still currently 16th in the country. Lost to Northern Illinois, which lost to Buffalo this past weekend. So once you get past really the top 12, top 15 type of teams, they're all starting to look kind of the same and fairly mediocre. I don't know. That's my humble opinion anyway. So while Missouri clearly so far is a flawed football team, again, if you just look at everybody else in the country, I think you'll start to feel a lot better, because those teams have plenty of flaws at this point as well. As I pointed out on Twitter early this morning, I was saying it seems like a lot of NFL fans, especially a lot of Kansas City Chiefs fans, who have the luxury of sitting on the 3 Super Bowl championships during the Patrick Mahomes era, and of course the most recent 2 championships. Chiefs fans are able to just go, so we're not perfect. What the heck? It's still early. We'll figure it out, that type of thing. Of course, as a Missouri fan, and I am both of these things, so this person lives in these 2 separate people and thoughts live simultaneously in the same time in my body, which is to say that as a Missouri fan, I'm naturally not nearly as confident because, well, I've been burnt before. And as a Chiefs fan, you've got one of the greatest players of all time. You sleep pretty darn well at night. But the point is, I think as a Missouri fan, if you don't just factor in the bizarre history Missouri has had at times and just general worry and disappointment that creep in to a lot of people in terms of human nature, I think you'll realize that, are Utah and Oregon and Miami, Florida, for example, are they all just extremely and obviously better than Missouri at this point? I wouldn't say so. So the point is while Missouri is not on the level of Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Ole Miss, you want to say that, I'll agree with you. But in terms of being right there in the hunt for the playoff, well, the Tigers are still there. They just got to play better ball moving forward. And of course, with Missouri on a bye this weekend, the Tigers' next game will be against Texas A&M in College Station. Finally, a reprieve from home games, am I right? But Missouri at Texas A&M going to be played at 11 a.m. Central Time on ABC, by the way, here in Week 6. You might be wondering, how is Texas A&M doing so far this season? Well, not so great, Bob. Thanks for asking. But it hasn't been a disaster by any means. Texas A&M opens the season by losing to Notre Dame 23-13 at home, which on its face isn't, a total disaster, but Notre Dame obviously quite a bit more mediocre than we would have thought maybe at the time. Also, A&M, a fairly uncomfortable victory at Kyle Field this past weekend, beating Bowling Green 26-20. So far, winning at Florida. Again, a Florida team that's ready to drive Billy Napier to the airport at this point. That is the highlight of the season so far under Mike Elko in year 1. So while this jury is still obviously very much out on whether the Elko era is going to work out or not, at Texas A&M, I think a lot of people, as the season approached and got closer, forgot that, you know what, for the most part, it's always tough to go through a new coach transition, unless hey, it's looking pretty good for Kalen DeBoer in Alabama right now, you got to say. But more often than not, that first year is going to be a tough start, and A&M is looking like they're going through that transition right now. The Aggies will play against Arkansas in Dallas this week, that annual game in AT&T Stadium, so that'll be a pretty good indicator of where both teams could be going here in the future. If this could be, both teams could be fighting for a bowl game, really, in a winning type season here, the winner of that game. So who does Missouri rooting for, Arkansas or A&M? Well, I think I'm going to root for Arkansas for this week, and then hopefully the wheels fall off for the Hogs the rest of the way. And speaking of the high variance Hogs, well, the red zone for Missouri and all football teams can be quite statistically volatile, especially from game to game. Now, the red zone obviously going to be a huge factor in whether you win a football game or not, But hey, you go 1 out of 5 one game, going 4 out of 5 the next game in terms of scoring touchdowns is very much a possibility. But I am certainly not going to be leaving all of that up to chance. There's been some real reasons Missouri struggled in short yardage and in red zone, especially this past week against Vanderbilt. So let's talk about some possible solutions coming up here in just a little bit. But hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a ball game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com, of course. And I'll tell you this, just looking ahead to the NFL schedule, the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Los Angeles Chargers. And while anytime you're in Los Angeles, especially for a Chargers game, you got to remind yourself that SoFi Stadium is basically Arrowhead Stadium West at this point. Still, the Chargers +7 at home against Kansas City. I realize Justin Herbert's status is up in the air here. Let's stay away. That's way too many points, it would seem to me. But regardless of your opinion, you got to visit FanDuel.com and check out our latest deal for you. So again, red zone percentage, especially in terms of the amount of times you score touchdowns, can be quite volatile from game to game. Unlike, for example, your pass completion percentage is generally going to be in the same area. You're not going to have, say, 25% completing the ball one game and then 75% the next game, generally speaking. But that is generally speaking something that happens with a decent amount of frequency in terms of your red zone touchdown percentage. But I will say, I don't think it's just a matter of luck, especially if you're watching the game last week. You can't just be like, well, Missouri just kind of got unlucky there. No, there were some real reasons for Missouri's struggles in the red zone and in some short yardage moments as well. And some of it was play calling. Some of it was Brady Cook's decision making. But in terms of the actual run game, a lot of it was the offensive line and just a lack of execution there. Now, I'll just say, generally speaking, the offensive line has not been up to snuff. And I'm just talking about as a group here, because I'll just be brutally honest in my own self-assessment. I just don't think my strength is not individually assessing offensive linemen. I think I'm pretty good at assessing lines as a group, but individual play, that is definitely not my strength. But I will say, just to my own untrained eyes, if you will, Connor Tollison, the Missouri center, has been quite good this season. Other than one early snap against Vanderbilt, and again, just one. Hey, we can live with one on the season. There were too many of those last season from Tollison, but this season, the one bad snap, I can live with that in 4 games. But I think he's been a really, really good blocker this season. Unfortunately, the other 4 guys, I think, again, I'm just talking collectively here, I think have been spotty, really at best at times. Been a lot of penalties, a lot of mistakes, a lot of missed assignments, just more than there should be. When I say a lot, I mean there's just more than there should be. So that's everybody. Again, everybody other than Tollison, I'm going to kind of throw under the bus right now. If you don't think that's fair, you think you're the expert in individual offensive line play assessment, then by all means, hit me up at lockedonmizzou@gmail.com. But that's the way I'm looking at it right now. But I do think, other than just, hey, the offensive line's got to play better, I do think there's some things schematically that the Tigers can do to improve their effectiveness in these 2 areas, which are short yardage success and red zone success. Number one, especially in short yardage, I do think that Missouri right now has to be a little bit more aggressive. So when it's 2nd down and 1 in particular, but even if it's 3rd down and 1, because that's when the defense really gets aggressive, don't be afraid to throw a play action pass, and not just a play action pass into the flat necessarily. Take a deep shot. I'm just telling you, sometimes those short yardage situations, that's when you've got a chance to score a touchdown, not just pick up the chains and keep the chains moving, and hopefully you'll get a touchdown. That may be your moment to score right then and there. So I think that's something that Missouri should look at and see how aggressive its opponents are being in those scenarios. By the way, last night, the Kansas City Chiefs won the game on Sunday Night Football against the Atlanta Falcons on a tackle from Missouri's own Nick Bolton. And here's, speaking of another Missouri connection, Chase Daniel was talking about the ending sequence there for the Chiefs and the Falcons. Here's what Chase had to say. This was from Atlanta's perspective. They had the football. Chase said, "I hate that play call so much. It was going to be a quarterback sneak, but Kirk Cousins alerts," in other words, he changes the play, "into an outside zone run because Kansas City is in its gaps defense," meaning Kansas City had a whole bunch of guys basically attacking the gaps to the guard and between the guard and the center and the guards and the tackles, that type of deal. Basically trying to take away the quarterback sneak is the bottom line. Chase continues, "The problem is that the Chiefs were in goal line defense. Spags wins again." And I'll just say, the reason I think this is interesting is because, well, Missouri obviously has been a very effective outside zone team, not just last season with Cody Schrader, but so far this season as well. Nate Noel, nearly 200 yards rushing, 199 to be exact, this past weekend against Vanderbilt. But as effective as that outside zone play is, I think a lot of its effectiveness goes away the closer you get to the goal line, especially you get in the red zone. All of a sudden, what happens? As Missouri said this offseason, as Eli Drinkwitz said this offseason, they practiced a lot in the red zone, especially at the beginning of camp, because it quickens the clock in your head. You've got to make quicker decisions with the football as a passer. Everything's got to happen a little bit quicker because the space that you're working with is just that much smaller. That means more defenders are nearer the line of scrimmage. More defenders are able to commit to the running game. So therefore, all of the math that you have there in terms of the outside zone, hey, I'm going to chip this guy, we'll double team this guy for a second, and then I'm going to get downfield and all that good stuff, that gets a lot harder when you get into short yardage, when you get into red zone, and just in general, trying to get outside. For instance, Missouri at one point tried a bit of an end-around play. I believe it was the handoff was to Luther Burden in the red zone, and they lost 5 yards on the play. Again, when you're between the 20s, you're farther back, and the defense, the safeties in particular, have more field to cover behind them. To me, those plays are just much more effective, and at the very least, they're a heck of a lot less likely to get stuffed and lose 5 yards and potentially kill a drive, that type of deal. So to me, that's one of the biggest things that Missouri has got to do is loosen up the defense when they have the opportunity in short yardage. And also, just as this is something I said previously on the show, simplify the blocking schemes as well. Not only are more defenders able to commit to the line of scrimmage in these situations, which affects the timing of the passing game, well, obviously it's going to affect the timing of blocking schemes as well, especially when you're trying to get downfield and to the second level in a zone type of scheme or pulling around on a power type of play. I think Missouri at this point would be better served to, at least in those situations, these specific situations, just take a man and push him out of the way. Stop getting so complicated. Just get a yard or two, move on, move the chains, and get the first down. And right now, Luther Burden is on pace for only about 850 yards receiving. But you know what? I don't really care about that part. In fact, I think it's time that Missouri gets the others involved at receiver to really make this passing game start humming. But before I get there, let's talk about game time, because this is a great time of year to go to all types of live events. Ah, yes, it is officially fall. The weather's cooling off a little bit. You know, that also means it's time for postseason baseball, or at least I hope it is time for postseason baseball for the Kansas City Royals. A week ago, I'd have felt pretty confident about it. Now, holy moly, we are possibly in the middle of one of the great collapses of all time. But if you go to Game Time right now, open up the app on your phone as I have right now, you'll see that wild card tickets to any of those possible home games, just over $100 to get in the game. And of course, you can check out the Game Time picks to get their best deals, filter out all the nonsense, and just get to the good stuff with Game Time picks and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. If you're a big NBA fan like I am, you've no doubt heard Shaquille O'Neal on Inside the NBA talk about the others. And of course, what he's talking about is the role players, the guys other than, for example, Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. His point is you always need the others to come through as well. Guys like Robert Horry, guys like Derek Fisher, that type of thing. Well, in this particular case for Missouri, I think we need to get the others involved at receiver. In particular, I'm talking about Dominique Johnson, also Josh Manning and Daniel Blood, also to some extent Mookie Cooper as well. But really, to me, especially Dominique Johnson and Josh Manning, because right now Theo, Wease, and Luther Burden are often commanding double teams from what I can see, especially in really crucial third down type of situations. And at the very least, these guys are getting obviously the best defensive backs in man coverage. So when you consider all of that, and you consider that Missouri's got the outside zone working pretty doggone well too, it's really hard for me to believe that Missouri can't get really great matchups, really just mismatches on safeties and linebackers down the field with Marquise Speedy Johnson, who was a heck of a downfield threat last season, and also Josh Manning, too, a guy that Missouri talked up quite a bit in this previous offseason. So let's find ways to get them the ball, because if Manning, for example, is as good as he's been talked up to be, and if Dominique Johnson is as good as I think that he's capable of being based on his play last season, well, let's see it. Let's see them dust some strong safeties and some linebackers, because I just don't think there are enough guys on most rosters in the country that should be able to cover all of that. And to me, it's on Kirby Moore to get those guys open, to get those guys in those particular matchups. Now, if the offensive line is not going to protect Brady Cook well enough, and it's definitely been spotty at times, his pass protection this season, then obviously it's not going to matter. Then you're not going to have enough time to take advantage of those downfield matchups necessarily. But to me, the only time I really saw guys getting schemed open last week, a couple passes to Luther Burden for touchdowns. Hey, that was great. That's awesome. But you kind of have to work to scheme Luther Burden open. It should be easy to Johnson, Manning, Blood, Cooper, those type of guys up on linebackers and safeties. To me, we haven't done that enough so far this season. And finally, I'm sure there are a lot of Missouri fans out there who are going, wait a second, this is your second episode talking about this Vanderbilt game and you haven't brought up Blake Craig yet? Fair point, I suppose. And I will just say the one thing I think I can bring to the table here is I thought that one kick was good. The one that was just off to the right, off the right post in the north end zone there, the ball that Blake Craig clearly thought was good as well. Well, mark me down as one of several people who thought, wait, that was no good. I thought that went in. One of those kicks that is so high, and you'll see this frequently now these days as kickers are getting better and better and stronger legs. Well, that ball just goes right up over the top of the upright, and it's really difficult to know, now, wait a second, was that good or not? And by the way, if there were actually an upright a post that extended all the way up there, well, you'd have the satisfaction of knowing, hey, it's going to clank off this thing. Will it go in or not? As we saw in the game, it did not go in for Craig on that miss. So obviously, what more do I really have to add here other than, gee, I hope Blake Craig makes as many field goals as possible. But quite honestly, I'm just more worried about us settling for so many field goals, both in terms of offensive execution and risk management, coaching decisions, by the way. I will say Blake Craig did make the kicks he absolutely had to make in overtime as well, and he almost seems like more confident from 50-plus at this point. So to me, worrying is kind of dumb in some ways, especially on something like kicking where there's no real analysis to be made here. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I hope he makes all of his kicks from here going out. All I know is for a fact that Missouri is 4-0, so worrying about whether or not Blake Craig is going to be good or not in the future, I just don't have a whole lot to add there in terms of commentary, folks. This is an opinion-based show, and my opinion is it's better when Blake Craig makes kicks than misses them. And I'm also of the opinion, more importantly, Missouri's just got to not put so much pressure on Blake Craig. Missouri's got to get that ball into the end zone. Then I think those type of things will take care of themselves. Let Blake Craig get warmed up and confident on some extra points. How about that? That seems like a good plan to me. And thanks for making Locked On Mizzou a part of your plan every day. And you know what? For your second listen today, why not check out Locked On College Football as well to get the national perspective in the Locked On format as well. My buddy Spencer McLaughlin going to take you through everything happening on the gridiron through the country. Find Locked On College Football on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts as well. So until next time, I'm John Miller. Thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.